Hi, and welcome to Moving Forward. This program, we're going to be identifying how we teach sexual intimacy in our culture today, and also try to offer some other ways that we need to be teaching sexual intimacy, because obviously what's working is not, or what we have right now is not working. And so our needs, we really want to have our needs for sexual expression and human connection met. And we don't need to resort to abuse or harm in order to have those needs met. And in this program, we will be having discussions about pornography. We're not advocating any kind of censorship at all. We're not prudish about sexuality and the pleasures of sexuality. And this program is hoping to explore sex and sexuality outside of the norms, outside of this male-centric cliche that's within our current sex industrial complex, I like to call it. And we're also going to look a little bit at legal avenues for change. And with me to discuss this is Dr. Shelly Grabe, who I really am appreciating that you're here today. She's an assistant professor up at UCSC in social psychology. Her focus is on human rights in Nicaragua and Tanzania. She teaches a course that examines how issues of power, ideology, and inequity get played out on women's bodies, which contributes to their marginalization and threatens their well-being. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And also with us is her student, Nicole Wimple, who's also a social psychology student or a psychology undergrad. So thanks so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Let's start out with looking at the attitudes of women in sports that we, the rape culture in sports.
Mm-hmm. Well, in part one of the show, we talked a little bit already about how in the mainstream media in general, women are very hypersexualized in the way that we evaluate women is largely rooted in their appearance. But one venue where this is becoming particularly more important is in male sports venues, where we know a common thread that exists in terms of how women are discussed is centered on their role as objects or often trophies that are available as objects of reward for successful men. And this often begins simply with the way that women are talked about in sports arenas, whether it's partners of successful athletes or if it's viewers. And we have one clip that we took from the website feministing.org that addresses this issue and starts to connect how some everyday commentary about women's appearance in these venues starts to lead to situations that put women at high risk. So let's watch it first and then talk a little bit about why it's important.
Okay.
Auburn, I want to admit that, but she also, Miss Alabama, and that's A.J. McCarron's girlfriend, okay? And right there on the right is Dee Dee Bonner. That's A.J.'s mom. Wow, I'm telling you, quarterbacks, you get all the good-looking women. What a beautiful woman.
Wow, A.J.'s doing some things right down in
So if you're a youngster in Alabama, start getting the football out and throw it around the backyard with Pops.
If you play football, you get the woman. It's like, part of the deal, right? She's in Sports Illustrated, so everybody wants her and wants, and if you throw the football around, boys,
Right, and that message may be obvious to us, but I think to a lot of viewers it might be really subtle. And it's such a standard form of objectification that I think it passes under the radar for most.
Absolutely.
And in fact, I think a lot of people could watch it and think, we're making too much out of nothing. What's really here to talk about? But I think the idea is that the extent to which we normalize this discussion of women potentially being trophies for a successful quarterback or whomever, that it begins to create this culture that many scholars call rape culture. And again, some people might think that's a huge leap. How do you go from appreciating somebody who is beautiful to suggesting that these kind of attitudes could lead to a culture of rape? That might seem like a leap to a lot of people. But the connection is that a lot of this narrative starts to create this context whereby women are viewed as commodities. And they're commodities that can be won by successful, powerful males, even if the woman is not necessarily a willing participant. And this is happening more regularly now that we'll hear stories of professional athletes that have either severely assaulted their partners or even murdered them. And we hear this with some regularity now. And right now, the case that's getting the most national attention happens to be an example where football players are involved, but in this example, it's young football players that are in a high school, and this case is currently in the courts right now. in Steubenville, Ohio, where young football players in a high school literally dragged a woman who was intoxicated from party to party, sexually assaulting her, and videoed the series of events that evening, including commentary regarding the nature of the sexual activity they were engaging in.
Yeah, they urinated on
and then posted this material online. And so I think this example underscores some of the major issues here that we're trying to get at. One is that these young men not only felt entitled to this woman who couldn't consent because she was intoxicated, but saw absolutely nothing wrong with her behavior, otherwise they wouldn't have posted it online. Yeah. So they had this documentation of their event, of their prowess, of their achievement, of their entitlement, but saw absolutely no way that this evidence could be incriminating in terms of a criminal behavior. So posting it online sort of underscores their sense of entitlement. Similarly, some of the community response in Steubenville underscores how we are more supportive of a football culture whereby male athletes are entitled to women's bodies, because many members of the community demonstrated backlash towards this young woman and were very upset she brought the case forward because they were worried that it ruined the reputation of the football players. So the concern in the community by many members was not about the woman's safety, but it was about the entitlement, protecting the entitlement of the football players. And so if we think about how this acceptance we have that devalues women and allows them to be objects that could be won by successful men contributes to this culture of rape, it's not really that surprising that we think about where the U.S. ranks with other countries. And we know that compared to many other industrialized countries in the world, the U.S. ranks really highly in terms of rates of rape against women. But I think it's still reasonable that a critic could ask, how do you get from sexually objectifying images to rape? That could still seem like quite a bit of a leap, but one of the things that we know is true in terms of how we socialize normative heterosexual relationships is that they really pull on the script of male aggression and dominance and female passiveness. So even in print mainstream ads, we see images where men are the aggressors and they're dominating over a female body that is passive and unconsciously wants to be overpowered. And these advertisements are really prevalent in the mainstream media. It's also true that we are increasingly sexualizing violence against women, and women's bodies are being used to sell products that have nothing to do with the body in a way that demonstrates violence. So, for example, in ads that are intended to sell men's suits, for example, we may often see an unclothed woman or a woman who's being choked by a man's shirt tie and have nothing to do with men's suits. Yeah. Similarly, there are images, widely spread images, where women's body parts that are hinting at potential violation or even murder are being used to sell things like shoes. Yeah. And, again, a critic could say, well, those are kind of obscure, random images that you have to dig for. But the reality is that that's not true. They're very readily available, and they're widely printed in outlets that are widely consumed, like Vogue magazine. And I think a lot of marketers are worried that we've become desensitized to this. So they up the ante and print ads that hint at gang rape, for example. And again, these are not obscure images. So Calvin Klein's ad, for example, is about jeans. There are no jeans being worn by the woman in the picture that appears to be being gang raped. Dolce & Gabbana have similar ads. And one of the concerns is that these ads are intended for both men and women. They often appear in magazines targeted toward women. And the scripts that people take away from these put women in very vulnerable positions in which they could get raped. And so I think the connection here is that the sexualized nature of violence is really hard to escape for most people. Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at this is a relatively new film that's from Media Education Foundation called Sexed Up Kids, and it helps make some of these connections in terms of sexual violence.
Little girls are going from toddlers to teenagers with just about nothing in between.
I think there's a real compelling argument to be made that it's priming them for sexualization when there's just one form of play that they do for 3 years, and it's all about being the prettiest of them all and the fairest of them all. That becomes problematic. It goes really quickly from being the prettiest little girl to needing to be the hottest little girl. Boys are completely steeped in this culture where girls' sexuality becomes a performance, and it distorts their view of what they're supposed to want and what they're supposed to look for in a girl.
The boy I was sexting was in grade 8. He thought it would be funny if he'd send it to 10 of his friends. My heart just dropped. I was like, how many people have seen me like this?
Adults do so much hand-wringing because they look at individual girls and oftentimes their parents and say, how could you do such a thing? Why would you do such a thing? And it's not shocking to me at all. I mean, if you look across our culture, everything is saying promote yourself, flaunt yourself, exhibit yourself. If young people weren't picking up on that message, they're missing the dominant mainstream message to young people today.
Girls are just growing up so quickly, and boys are, and everyone's looking at porn now because it's so available to everyone, and the romance is still there. Yeah, there's no romance there.
The girls are really feeling that, and they're holding out this hope that in spite of all the porn, in spite of all the requests that are being made on them, somewhere in there, there's still the possibility of romance. There's still the possibility of mystery and love and passion.
You know, when we think about pornography, I think that it's important for people to understand that even 6-year-olds are able to have access to this. And it's being given for free, and it's they try to hook them in through free downloadable content. And it's become highly addictive, and so the children are learning about sex basically through pornography. And we've seen this also in the way that women view their bodies, that they feel like they have to look like the women in pornography by shaving off all their pubic hair and trying to imitate their pubic region to even look like the women in pornography. Mm-hmm. And so I know, Nikki, just recently you've done a paper on this, and so I'd like you to talk to us more about this.
Yeah, I think it's first of all necessary to clear up any misconceptions that people that do critically analyze pornography are in some way against sex or anti-sex, and porn producers will tell you that consistently that, oh, you're just anti-sex. That's not true at all. I'm not anti-sex. I think sexual intimacy is a very important part of the human experience. What I do want to say is that porn over the past decade has become more and more brutal and degrading and violent, and especially towards women. A study conducted in 2005 actually looked at the violence and sexual aggression that's occurring in most pornographies, very well-rented pornos, in fact. They found that over 78% of these included spanking, gagging, choking, even kicking, which is very problematic to me. And again, these are mainstream pornos. That doesn't even include rape pornography or torture pornography or S&M pornography. And so what my problem is that what's going on screen is actually happening in real life. And men that are viewing pornography, it's been shown in numerous studies, there's an abundance of literature on the matter, they're actually taking what they're seeing, this sexual aggression, and then they have a higher likelihood of committing sexual assault and rape. And this is, again, numerous studies that have found this. So, porn producers and consumers alike will tell you, well, what you're seeing is just fantasy or it's happening on screen. It's not actually happening. But the thing is, it is happening. And that's why it's problematic. Again, like you were saying, it's problematic too because kids can access this stuff. And they can access this violence, and they realize and they start to learn that sex is intertwined with violence. And so it's not surprising that then, some of them will be bringing violence into their very first sexual encounters. Mm-hmm. So instead of being caring or compassionate, they're learning from pornography and the scripts that are used in pornography that it's okay to slap a woman in order to get pleasure. And that's very dangerous. So pornography both increases men's likelihood of, committing sexual assault and rape. So that's dangerous to young men. It's dangerous to the women that are victims of the men who view pornography, and it's dangerous to children. So I do think it's high time we start really, criticizing the industry. And again, I'm not advocating for censorship either, like you were saying. But I definitely do want us to start looking at how pornography has these really negative effects.
What we often don't think about is the woman who's being pictured in the pornography as well. She often has overlay in the sex industry. She's often working in prostitution on some level. She may have started at the age of 13 as a runaway. She's often drug addicted. She has a history of child sexual abuse often. And so when men are masturbating to these images, I mean, they need to understand, who are these women? And there is harm right there. And when you're looking at the people that are filling the industry.
I think the very nature of it being used as entertainment underscores the importance of that, because the common response often is that, well, the women in the films are choosing it. They've chosen to get in this industry, and they're in fact making a lot of money. It sort of it hides many of the factors that you're bringing up, that many of the women actually would choose a different career if it were as lucrative, or if they didn't have a history of childhood sexual abuse.
Right.
So I think there are a number of factors that aren't brought into that discussion.
No, not at all. Let's take a look at this clip. It's from a program that was called Digital Nation, and it discusses avatars and the power of avatars. And it also, and the second part of it, I've mixed in a piece from Price of Pleasure, which is a film about pornography and the industry. And I think it's important for the viewers to understand that right now, this is legal child pornography. You can go online and put your image out to a website with the image of your daughter, your neighbor, your son, whoever is your sexual person you want to have sex with, and they will create avatars for you to be able to have legal child pornography for yourself. So let's take a look.
Well as how our virtual experiences change us.
So we use computer algorithms to do it automatically. This is a subject who's in the midst of an experiment right now. She's wearing a head-mounted display that shows what you're seeing here.
Jeremy Bailenson runs the Virtual Human Interaction Lab at Stanford.
She's actually seeing depth and stereo. You can see that candy coming right into her mouth.
His research shows how the distinctions between real and virtual are becoming blurred, even interchangeable.
Subjects would report afterwards being sick, being full.
It's a subject of intense interest right now to the government, marketers, even the military, all of whom fund his work.
We're not wired to differentiate experiences like this one from actual eating, meaning digital stuff is such a new phenomenon that if it looks real and it feels real, the brain tells us it's real.
And the identification gets even more profound when our avatars wear our real-life faces.
The Free Speech Coalition has repeatedly won important legal battles. In 2002, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the ban on virtual child pornography, granting the pornography industry the right to produce images which simulate child pornography, using computer-generated technology and youthful-looking adults.
This is frightening to me because this is also something that the ACLU has pushed for, which is the right for men to have access to legal child pornography. And I think it's something that aware people need to be made, we need to know about this, we need to fight this, because clearly avatars are very powerful and they're being used to, I think, encourage men to attack women.
Well, you know, one thing that's interesting is that in addition to this research that was showing these avatars, that research in communication studies in general, not related to pornography, shows that while most of us as individuals think we can discern the difference between entertainment and reality, that most of us actually use media and entertainment as a way to construct our realities. So there's a lot of danger, regardless of the venue, in terms of how we internalize that and create our own realities based on it.
Yeah. I'm going to be talking a little bit about a book. It's Are Women Human by Catherine McKinnon. She's a phenomenal legal scholar who helped to create the sexual harassment law. And this piece that I'm going to be talking about is from her book, Are Women Human? I highly recommend it for people who haven't read this yet. And in it she talks about torture. And torture is widely recognized as a fundamental violation of human rights. Inequality on the basis of sex is also condemned, and sex equality is affirmed as a basic human rights value in many nations. So why is it torture in the form of rape, battering, and pornography is not seen as a violation of human rights? When women are abused, human rights are violated. Anything less implicitly assumes that women aren't human. Internationally, torture has a profile. It begins with abduction, detention, imprisonment, isolation, and may even end in death, making the victim feel worthless, hopeless, and these attitudes are integral to the torture. Victims are selected because they are members of a special social group. And what torture does is internationally recognized. Its purpose is to break people. People change under such pressure and brainwashing, post-traumatic stress, and we have Stockholm Syndrome, and there are long-term consequences, including dissociation, which promotes survival, but can be hard for people to reverse. The purpose of torture is to control, intimidate, or eliminate those who insult or challenge or are seen to be undermining the powers that be. So let's think about the torture of women. The same things happen that happen in Amnesty International reports, except they're happening in homes in Nebraska. They're happening in pornography studios right now in Los Angeles. They're happening in Nevada brothels rather than cells in Iran or Mexico or Iraq. But the social and legal responses to the experiences are not at all the same. Torture is not personal. Torture is not attributed to one sick person and dismissed as an exception, or if it is, that maneuver is not dismissed as a cover-up by the human rights community. With torture, an increase is not dismissed as just an increase in reporting, as if a constant level of this is somehow acceptable. Billions are not being made selling as entertainment pictures of what is not regarded as torture, nor is torture generally regarded as sexual entertainment. Never is a victim of torture asked, well, didn't you really like it? You really wanted it. What needs to be asked is why the torture of women by men is not seen as torture. Especially, why is it not seen as political? And why is it that the state claims that it's not involved? In the US, women disappear on a daily basis from their homes, from supermarkets, parking lots. They're found in ditches. They're floating down rivers. Sometimes we dig up bones along with those of 10 or 15 other women years later. Serial rapists and serial murderers are almost always men who target women almost exclusively. Why isn't this political? The abuse is not random or individual. It's not considered political, especially if it has to do with sex. What is political? When men control and hurt and torture other men. When people who deserve dignity and a measure of power suffer, that's torture. Atrocities done to women are denied as atrocities by not warranting any political meaning. The reason often given, torture of women does not involve acts by the state. The gender bias is seen as private. So what the majority of women in the world are harmed in private. Should the rights be limited by the idea that torture to women internationally happens in private? Absolutely not. The US courts have held that pornography must be protected as speech, in spite of its harm to sex equality. The US government legalized an admitted human rights violation on the view that the harm that pornography causes is more important than the people that it hurts. And if someone took pictures of what happened in prison cells, Guantanamo Bay, could those be sold as protected legal speech in the open market and seen as the state being not involved? Finally, let's consider the criminal tribunals for Rwanda, which found 3 media leaders guilty of genocide and persecution for broadcasts of publications that impelled the killing of Tutsis and moderate Hutu civilians in the Rwandan genocide of '94. The point of the ruling was to find and prohibit what was done to people as a result of their hate speech. Cartoons that sexualize hate and fear of Tutsi women were linked to their mass rape. Their approach offers guidance for the regulation of pornography, including racist pornography.
I'm not